Begin today the Gemara on Daf Zayin, Amud Aleph, 10 lines down from the top of the Amud, where it says Itmar. Zok the Gemara Itmar, we learned the following halacha, or the following machlekes. Taida sheshachta l'shem taidas chaverei. A person is bringing a carbon taida, which is usually brought in a case where one of the four things that are in the kapitel Kuf Zayin of Tehillim, where one has to thank Hashem, and you bring a special carbon taida. It's a shlomim, but it's additionally a taida. Now he brought this taida, but what was the kavanah that the kain had? L'shem taidas chaverei. So there was Reuven bringing a carbon taida, and there's Shimon bringing a carbon taida, and this kain is thinking that this is Shimon's carbon taida instead of Reuven's. Now, what does this sound like? This sounds like what we learned before, a kavanah that's called shinui bailam, that the kain changed his kavanah and he's thinking about the wrong owner when he's bringing the carbon. But that's actually not what our Gemara is talking about. We learned before, Rashi mentioned it, and the Gemara also, that shinui bailam is only in a case where the kain has a kavanah in any of the Avedis that the zrika of the dam, which is the main kapara of the carbon, will be done for someone else. So he's doing it for an atonement for another individual. That's what's called shinui bailam. That's not what happened in this case. Over here, he's shechting the carbon, and instead of thinking that this is the taida of Ruvain, he's thinking this is the taida of Shimon. That's the case here. Now, this is actually similar to a case that the Gemara is going to bring soon, where the kain is makir of the carbon chatas, and he has in mind it's l'shem chatas, but not this chatas. It's instead of the chatas for chaylev, for fats that was eaten, he's bringing a chatas thinking that it's a chatas for blood that was eaten. So this is a similar kind of case. So what's the halacha here? Rabba Omar Ksheira. Rabbi says this carbon is totally kosher. Rav Chisda Omar Psula. Rav Chisda says it's pasul, since we're talking about a taida, the meaning of psula means not that the carbon itself becomes pasul, as we learned before already, but it just means that for the owner, it did not work for him to fulfill his obligation.
Ritzui.
Right. So the Gemara now explains what the machlokes is. Rabba Omar Ksheira, Rabbi says it's kosher because taida, l'shem taida nishchata. He shechted the taida, even though he was thinking that this is Shimon's taida, while it's Reuven's taida, but it's still a taida. So therefore it doesn't matter. Rav Chisda Amar Psula, however, Rav Chisda says it's pasul. L'shum shlomim didei nishchata be'inan. In order for it to be kosher, it has to be shechted as a shlomim, but for the right name of the shlomim. This is the shlomim of Reuven, not the shlomim of Shimon. Okay, so again to clarify, we're not talking about shinui bailam, because that's only regarding the zrika of the carbon, the kapara of it. But here, the chiddush of Rav Chisda is that the name of the owner of the carbon is actually sort of a name of the carbon itself. If this is Reuven's taida and this is Shimon's taida, it's like a different name in the carbon itself, and therefore, if you think while you're bringing Reuven's taida that it's Shimon's taida, it's going to be pasul. This is the pshat that many Mefarshim say in the Gemara, according to what Rashi and Tosfos says here. There are, however, other Mefarshim that say that Rav Chisda will only pasul the carbon in a case where Reuven is bringing the carbon for one kind of story that happened to him. For example, he got saved from prison. That's one of the cases you bring a carbon. And Shimon is bringing the taida for a different reason. He's bringing it, let's say, because he came from overseas. Then the Gemara has this shaila, and Rav Chisda then would say it's pasul. Okay, now the Gemara says, Omar Rabbe explains, Minilo, what is my source that in such a case it would still be kosher, the Tanya, because Nabraisa we learned. What does it say regarding the Taida? Upsar Zevach Taidas Shlomov, B'yoyim Hakriva Yezivchai, that the meat of the Taidas Shlomov, Zevach Taidas Shlomov, in the day that he brings this carbon. So what do we learn out from these extra words? Zevach Taidas Shlomov. So Abachanan Mishum Amma Mishum Rabbi Eliezer, that Baal Lelamed, this pasuk teaches that Taida, Sheshachta, L'shem Shlomim, if you shechted a Taida for the sake of a Shlomim, Ksheira, it'll still be kosher. However, Shlomim Nishchatu, L'shem Taida, but a Shlomim that was shechted for the sake of a Taida, Psulim, then it will be pasul. Oma Hefrish Ben Zeh Lezeh, what is the difference between the two? Because Taida, Kruya Shlomim. Taida is also called a Shlomim, because a taida is first a shlomim, but then in addition it's also a taida, so it's called a shlomim as well. But ve'ein shlomim kriya taida. But a shlomim though is not called a taida, and therefore if you think that it's for a taida, it'll be pasul. That's the brisa. Now says the Gemara, what do I see from this? Shlomim l'shem taida psula. The brisa is saying if you bring a shlomim thinking that it's for a different carbon, which is the taida that does not have the same name as a shlomim, then it's pasul. But ha taida l'shem taida ksheira. But if you bring a taida and you're thinking that it's for a taida, it'll always be kosher. So the Gemara adds, don't you think, my love, that the chavrei, even if he's thinking that I'm bringing it for a taida of a different person, it's the taida of Reuven, and the Kain's thinking that it's the taida of Shimon, and it'll still be kosher. So this is where Rabbi says, I see that it'll be kosher in such a case. Now this is the reason why when Rabbi spoke about this din, he chooses the example of talking about a taida. Theoretically, the same halacha would apply to other karbanis, but he's talking about a taida since the raya for his din he brings from this brisa, which is talking about a taida. So the Gemara answers, Lahi, this is not a proof, because I can tell you the day that only if he's thinking that this is this person's taida, then it'll be kosher. But not, you can't be medayik from here that if he's going to be thinking about that it's another person's taida, it would still be kosher. So the Gemara asks him that, but how could you say so? But now you're saying that if a kohen brings a taida of one person and he's thinking that it's someone else's, then it would be possible. But if so, why would the Braisa bring the example that only when it's a shlamim and he's thinking that it's a taida, then it would be possible? Listni taida l'shem taida. Let it give this example that Avchista says that it's a taida for one person, and you're thinking that it's a taida of another, that then it's possible. V'kol sheken shlamim l'shem taida. And definitely I would know that if it's a shlamim, and you're thinking for that it's for a taida, which is not the same name at all as this carbon, that it would be possible. And says the Gemara, shlamim l'shem taida didei itzrichlei. Now the reason why we're saying dafke a shlamim l'shem taida or taida l'shem shlamim, because there is a chiddush regarding this case where he shechs the shlamim, thinking that it's a taida, that it's possible. Even if it's the kavanah here is the taida of the same person, but there's a chiddush that this is possible. What's the chiddush? Itzrich lei. I need the brisa to teach this to me. Because I would think to say, since I see that in one way there's a connection between the two of them, because taida is also called a shlamim. So I would say that maybe shlamim nami kruyin taida. So maybe it works in the reverse as well, that shlamim also could be called a taida sometimes. And therefore, when you shech the shlamim for a taida, it would still be kosher. And therefore the Bryce is coming to teach this point that it only works if you have in mind taida l'shem shlamim, but not the other way around. That's why the Bryce used dafka these two cases. But it's not to be medayik that if it would be taida l'shem someone else's taida, then it would be possible. That's the Bryce has a specific chiddush that it wants to say regarding taida and the shlamim. Now here the Gemara is going to bring a number of halachas that Rav said. Some of them we learned before already. Rav said this halacha we already actually had before. Chatos shashachta l'shem chatos. If you bring a carbon chatos and it's a chatos that is for forbidden fat that was eaten b'shegeg, and he shechted it for a chatos, but for a chatos of a different aveda, for drinking blood b'shegeg. Ksheira, it's still going to be kosher because it still has the name chatos. L'shem ayla, but if it was brought for a different carbon for an ayla, then psula, then it will be possible. My time, what's the source for this? Because in the pasuk it says v'shachat oisol chatas. The source that chatas has to be lishma is where it says that it should be shechted for a chatas. Amar Achmana, that's what the Torah says. V'arei chatas l'shem chatas nishchata. And even if you're shechting it for a different chatas of a different aveda, but it's still a chatas, so it's kosher. However, l'shem oila, but if it's shechted for an oila, which is a whole different thing, then psula, then it will be possible. Rav also said another din chatas sheshachta ami shemechuyev chatas psula. Here Rav is talking about a different kind of a psul regarding the chatas, the shinui bailam. When the kayin shechted the carbon chatas, and he had in mind that it should be for someone else, not for this owner. That the kapara, the zrika of the dam, will be for someone else, and that someone else is also mechuyev chatas. Then it will be possible. However, but if he's thinking that he's bringing this carbon chatas for someone else, but that other person is chayiv in a different carbon, he was over on a esa, and therefore he's bringing the oila that will atone for that. So ksheida, in this case, it'll be kosher. What's the source for this? My time, because the pasuk says v'chiper olav, that you atone for him. This is the source where you have to have the kavanah for this owner. That's olav v'loy al chavere, to have in mind for this individual, not for his friend. But that means though, chaveiroi dum yedidei, his friend, which is in a similar situation like him. And that's b'mechuyev kapara kamaiseh, when his friend is also bringing a chatas like him. So if you have in mind for the other chatas of the friend, that the kapara is for him, then it'll pass. Not if it's a shem oila. This is, like the Gemara said before, this is what's called, that it's eina minoi, it's not machriv ba. If it's another person which is not at all in the same category, it does not invalidate the carbon. Another halacha Rava said, v'omar Rava, chatos sheshachta ami she'eina mechuyev klum. The kohen is shechting a chatos, and he's having in mind that it's not going to be for this owner, but it's for someone else, that's not chayiv in any carbon at all. Psula. This carbon will be pasul. Now, it would seem that if it's for someone that has no connection to any carbon at all, then it should not pasul it. If in the case before we said that he's not mechuyev in a kapara k'moisai, it will not invalidate the carbon. So why here, if the kohen is thinking for someone that has nothing to do with any aveda, why would it become pasul? So Rav explains, because she'ein lecha adam b'Yisrael she'ein mechuyev asay. Because there isn't a person amongst Eden, that there isn't one esed that he didn't transgress, that he has to have a kapara for this. And therefore, he has a connection to this carbon chatos. How so? Isn't a carbon chatos just a kapara for an aveda b'sheigeg, for a chiv kares? Why is someone that was over on an esed also connected to a chatos? And that is because of Amar Rava. There's another thing that Rava said, chatos mechaperes achai v'yasei, that when one brings a chatos, besides the fact that it's brought to be mechaper for an aveda b'sheigeg, where there's a chiv kares, it'll also atone for any esed that the person was over. And that's mikal v'chaimer. The kal v'chaimer is al chai v'krisis mechaperes, if it atones for a more severe aveda like a chayiv kares, al chai v'yasei l'kol shekain. So most definitely it would atone for a chiv esed. So therefore, if the kohen is thinking that he's bringing this carbon chatos for someone else that's not mechuyev in any carbon, he didn't designate any carbon for himself, but that person was over an esed. So therefore, the carbon chatos that's being brought here has a connection to that other person. It's chavei roi. It's like he's also shaykh to this carbon chatos, and therefore the kavanah of shaloi lishma will passel the carbon. And here we're talking about a chatos. It actually invalidates the whole chatos itself. Okay, so now the Gemara asks on this, but now remember the bas minahi. So are you saying that someone that's chayiv a carbon for an esed, so the chatos is considered to be in that same category for this person? In other words, because the chatos, like we said, is also mechaper for an esed, so therefore it's in the same category as a chatos. But go back a few lines before to the other statement that Rava just said before. Rava said, "Chatos sheshachta al misha mechuyev chatos psula." When you shech the chatos and you're having in mind the kapara for the wrong owner, and that wrong owner is also chayiv in a chatos, then it'll be pasul because he's connected to this kind of a carbon. But al misha mechuyev oilak sheira. But if you're thinking that it's for someone that's only chayiv oila, which comes to atone just for an eseh, so then it's kosher because the oila, which is for an eseh, has nothing to do with this chatos. But Rava just said that eseh gets atoned for even in the chatas as well. So why are we saying that if it's for someone else, Hashem Oila, it would still be kosher? Answers the Gemara that this point that we said before, that a chatas will also atone for an eseh, it's not a full-fledged kapara. Mikiva loy mechapra, full-fledged concrete atonement in the chatas for an eseh is not there. It's only mikufya mechapra. It's only this hovering, this little bit of a kapara for an eseh that you get in the chatas. So what does the Gemara mean to say with this answer? So Rashi explains that therefore, in a case where the other person already designated his oila for his eseh that he was over, so that's his full-fledged kapara. So therefore, he is not connected now to this carbon chatas that's being brought here for a aveda b'sheigig, for a kares. It's two distinct things. So the kavan of shalai d'shma for that oil will not invalidate this carbon. However, in the case where the kohen has a mind for someone that was not over any eseh yet, I mean he was. We say that every yid there's some eseh that he could bring a carbon for, but he didn't designate any carbon yet. So because he hasn't designated any carbon yet, we say that that person could be included in some level of a kapara in this chatas, and therefore it will be a kavanah that will invalidate the carbon. Okay, so the point is that if he already designated his own oila, so now he's already using his full concrete kapara for the essay in that oila. So he becomes disconnected of this chatas. But if he did not designate yet an oila, there is this somewhat kapara that he could still be connected to this chatas, and therefore Rava says, if you have a mind for somebody that didn't designate any carbon yet, it will be a kavanah that will invalidate the carbon. Another halacha Rava says, "Va'amar Rav oila sheshachta shalei lishma an oila that was shechted. Shalei Lishma, so what happens now? Also, Lizrak Dama Shalei Lishma. There's additional avodas that follow afterwards. By the oila, it will not work for the chayva of the owner, but the carbon has to continue being brought. And you may not now say, oh, the blood I could also have in mind for something else, because I anyways had the wrong kavana by the shchita. No, you have to have the right kavana when you continue doing the later avodas. This the Gemara brought this in the beginning of the Masechta, and it was medayik, this halacha from the Mishnah, and it brought there also what it continues here. Iba is saying either kra. I can say the source for this halacha is from a pasuk, or Iba is saying svara. I can tell you that the source is logical. Iba is saying mikra, either it's a pasuk which we quoted a few times before. Meitzis v'secha tishmar v'gaimer. The v'gaimer is it then first refers to this carbon as a neder kasher nedarta. Then it goes on to refer to it as a nedava. How is one carbon both a neder and a nedava? In the case where he lechatchila had a kavana lishma and it's a neder, and then there was a kavana shalei lishma, the carbon has to continue being brought now as an adava, even though the owner is not being yaitzes chiv on this. So since it has to continue being brought, you may not think a kavanah shalei lishma. There's an isser lo yechashiv. You may not think any kavanah shalei lishma in any avodah of a carbon. Or yibay same as svare, or this is just a logical idea mishum deshani b'cholo, because he had a kavanah of shalei lishma in one avodah, so he should continue having a kavanah shalei lishma for the other avodas. Why? As this has already been brought in the beginning of the Masechta, and the Gemara learned this out from the language of the Mishnah. Another halacha said, a carbon oila that someone designated, then he passed away, and now the inheritors have to bring this carbon oila. It's already been designated for an oila. Although it's not an obligation for them to atone for anything for them, but the carbon itself has already been designated, so it has to be brought. Now, if this carbon oila was shechted, and the kain had a kavana of a different carbon, so then psula, it'll be pasul. Now, what pasul means that the carbon itself is valid, but it'll be invalidated as far as fulfilling the obligation of this carbon that had to be brought, and it's going to have to be brought again. Now, this doesn't mean, what does it mean over here, that it has to be brought again? Not because these inheritors have some chayva on them, on their body as people, to bring this carbon. It was their father's carbon. Taisus actually discusses this earlier on Dav Dalet. What exactly is their obligation to bring this carbon? They're only Yarshim. It's not even their carbon b'chlal, and the chayva of the one that designated is not here anymore, so why are we bringing it again? So Taisus says this only works according to an opinion that's brought in the Gemara a few times, that there's a concept called shibuda dairaisa, which means once there's a carbon designated, it applies to different things, but over here it means once this carbon has been designated for the oila, so now there's a obligation min atayra to bring that carbon properly. So even though it's not an obligation on the actual yarshim themselves, but the obligation of the original owner that passed away still is there, that has to be worked properly. And when it's not, and you continue bringing the carbon as is, but the chayva that had to be fulfilled was not fulfilled when the wrong kavanah of shini kodesh was had, and therefore you're going to have to bring the carbon again. However, b'shini bailem ksheira, if the only kavanah that the kohen had was for a kapara for the wrong owner, then it will be kosher, because the aim bailem lachamisa. There is nobody that owns this carbon that needs any kapara that after the owner passed away. So there's no such a concept of shini bailem that could apply at this point. Now, Rav Pinchas bereider Rav Ami Omar, however, Rav Pinchas bereider Rav Ami argues. He says, no, yesh bailim la'achamisa. There is a concept of an owner to the carbon even after the original owner passed away. Now, what exactly is Rav Pinchas bereider Rav Ami saying with this statement? Is he fully arguing on what Rav has said? So the Gemara here addresses this. Rav Pinchas bereider Rav Ami. So Rav Ashi asks him, Dafke ka'av amar, you mean exactly what you're saying, that you're arguing with Rave, that yesh bailam la'achamisa, that the yarshim, the inheritors, they are the owner of this carbon after the father passed away, and therefore ubay la'asuye oilachriti. Even if the kain, the kavanah shalei lishma that he had was for a different owner, the inheritors will have to bring a new carbon because they are the owners of the carbon, and therefore they have an obligation, like an owner, to bring the carbon. So if it was brought for a different owner, the psul of shini bailam still applies, and therefore they're going to have to bring a new carbon. Is that what you meant to say with your statement? Or no, he didn't necessarily mean to argue with Rave. All he was saying was the ike kama asay gaba mechapra. What he was saying is that for the Yarshin, if they have a mitzvah saseh, or more than one mitzvah saseh that they were over on, and they need a kapara for, when they bring their father's carbon oila, so besides bringing that carbon oila that the father designated, it also atones for an aseh for them. But he didn't mean to go a step further and argue on what Rav said, that the halacha of Shini Bailin would apply here. We don't go so far. They're not really the true original owners of this. Amalei, so Rav Pinchas actually says, no, Dafka Kamina, I mean exactly what I said. I mean to fully say this, to argue on what Rav said, that the inheritors, are actually the full Bailam of the carbon. And therefore the halacha of Shini Bailam, when the kohen is thinking for a different person, will apply, that they will not fulfill their obligation, they have to bring this carbon again. This opinion of Rav Pinchas actually argues with what the Gemara discussed this before already, regarding after a person passes away. Before, the Gemara concluded that the Yerushalayim do not have a kinyan, do not have an ownership in the carbon. Rav Pinchas is arguing, saying that they do. Another point Rav said about a carbon, oila doirain hi. When you bring a carbon oila, it's not a regular kind of kapara like it is for a chatos, for a avera b'shoigeg. It's a gift that you give to the Eibishter. Because by a oila, which is coming to atone for an eseh, the main kapara is the tshuva that a person does. And then after that, you bring the carbon oila as a gift to appease. But it's not the actual kapara itself. So the Gemara explains, what does this mean? Hey chidami, what's the case here? If the person did not do tshuva yet, and the mitzvah say that he did not do, that is, so it's an aveda, so now zevach rishayim te'eva. So the carbon that he brings is abominable, and there's no proper kapara here. And if he did do tshuva, so then why would it be necessary to bring a carbon oil after this? Because Hatanya, the Braisa says, Avar al mitzvah say, if one did not fulfill a mitzvah say, Vishav, and then he does tshuva, loizaz misham achamaychalulai. He doesn't budge from that place, and the Eibishter forgives him just with the tshuva itself. So therefore, Shmam, from here we see it must be that the carbon oila atones for an eseh. It's only dairin. It's just a gift after this that the person already did tshuva. Now the Gemara here actually brings a simin going back on before, on all these statements that Rav just said. Chatas, almi, mechaper, oila, la'acha, dairin, simin, for all these halachas that we just learned. Now Tanya Nami Yochi in a Braisa we learned, like Rav said, regarding what an oila is for. Omer Rab Shimon, chatos lama ba. So why are you bringing a chatos? So the Gemara says, what do you mean, why are you bringing it? Lama ba lechaper. Carbon chatos is brought as a kapara for an aveda b'shegeg. So the Gemara explains, lama ba, why is the chatos coming lifnei oila? Why do we always bring the chatos before you bring an oila, when you have to bring both? Because it's the praklit. It's like a praklit, which is a defender or someone that's coming to speak to the king on behalf of someone that sinned, and he appeases the king. So that's the praklit shenichnas. He enters first. Ritza praklit. Now, once this person put up a good defense, a good argument, and he was successful with this, so then nichnas deiran achrav. Then you can afterwards bring a gift to appease the king and to bring the relationship back to the level that it was before. Even after the king forgives, Hashem forgives, it doesn't necessarily mean that the level of the relationship of the Yid with the Eibishter is exactly like it was before. Therefore, additionally, you have the carbon oila. Going back to the Mishnah, it said, Chutz min Pesach va'achatas chulu. All karbanis, when you have the kavanah shalei l'shma, so it does not invalidate the carbon itself, it just does not allow the person to fulfill his obligation with this carbon. Besides, the Pesach and the chatas, the kavanah shalei l'shma, invalidates the whole carbon. So the Gemara Pesach min Allah, what's the source for this, by the carbon Pesach? The pasuk says, Shamoir es chodesh ha'aviv v'asisa Pesach. Keep the month Chodesh Aviv, this which is the month of Nisan, and you make the carbon Pesach. What does it mean when it says Vasisa Pesach? This whole pasuk is extra. It already says another place to bring the carbon Pesach. It means Sheyiu Kol Asiyasav L'Shem Pesach. All of the parts, all avedis of the carbon should be L'Shem the Pesach and not L'Shem another carbon. That's the source regarding you can't have a kavanah for a different carbon. That's the Shini Kachim. So the Gemara says, Ashkan Shini Kodesh, or Shini Kodesh. So we see the source that by all of the Asiyas, all the Avedis of the Pesach, you can't have a kavanah for a different carbon. Shini Bailam Inolon, what's the source that if you have in mind by the Pesach for someone else, a different person, not the owner of this Pesach, that it'll also be a problem. The Chsiv, the Pasuk says, V'amartem Zevach Pesach hu. that you say that this is a Zevach Pesach. So it doesn't say Pesach, it says Zevach Pesach. Zevach refers to the Shechita. Why is it adding that word? That it's a Zevach for the Pesach. That means Shetei Zevicha L'Shem Pesach. It should be shechted for the sake of the Pesach and not anything else. But now, it sounds like it's saying that it should be shechted for a Pesach and not another carbon, but that's extra, because since we already know that it has to be shechted for this carbon and not for another, so we use this for another drasha to say that it shouldn't be shechted for a different owner. As we had before a number of times, this concept of Me'ena Inyan, that we use it for something else. Says the Gemara, okay, but this is not yet a good source to say the point of our Mishnah. Because what did our Mishnah say? That by Pesach it's unique that not only l'chatchila you have to have the kavanah l'shma, and if not, the owner did not fulfill his obligation, but it's actually ma'akiv. This is a must. And if you have the kavanah shaloi l'shma, it invalidates the whole carbon. So says the Gemara, Ashkechan, so from these sources that we brought here, I see the mitzvah. That this is l'chatchila, the mitzvah, the way it should be done. But la'akiv min alam, from but where do I know that if you don't have the right kavanah, whether sheni kodesh or sheni bailim, that this is going to passel the whole carbon? Answers the Gemara, al makra, the pasuk says, another pasuk, v'zavachta pesach l'shem l'kecha v'gomer. Shech the pasuk l'shem l'kecha, so this is yet another pasuk to say that it has to be shechted l'shma, so therefore, it's adding a second pasuk to say that now it's ma'akiv. This is Bechlal the rule regarding Kachim. When the Torah writes something twice, Shino of Akosov, it's La'akiv, to say that without this, Kavanah L'Shma, it'll be puzzle. Rav Safra asks, this Pasuk V'Zavachta Pesach is not a source for this, because Hai V'Zavachta, L'Hachi Yudasa, this Pasuk V'Zavachta, we're learning this point there. Hai Mi Boyel Elek Rav Nachman. We learn from here a different drasha, as Rav Nachman explained. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba Baravu, Aminayin, L'Moiser Pesach, Shekarav Shlomim. How do I know that when you have a carbon Pesach that was left over, it wasn't used for whatever reason for a Pesach? So what happens now? What do you do with it? That it becomes a Shlomim. You can bring it the rest of the year as a Shlomim. So let's learn from this pasuk. Shenema v'zavachta Pesach l'Hashem l'kecha, and then the pasuk goes on to say that this tzayin uvakar, whether it's sheep or small cattle, or bakar, large behemoths, large livestock. But the question is, how could it bring into this pasuk bakar into a carbon pesach? Carbon pesach could only be brought either from a lamb or from a goat. So why is it mentioning here bakar, large livestock? So mikan l'moisar ha-pesach shehei l'dovar haba min hatzaynu min habakar. From here I see that even the carbon pesach is sometimes something that's connected to another kind of carbon that could be brought from bakar, from the large livestock. And what is that? The main niu shlomim. That's the shlomim. So from here we see this pasuk is coming to teach this idea that a carbon pesach, it's left over the rest of the year, it's brought as a shlomim. So we don't have this extra pasuk. So from where do we learn out that by a carbon pesach, when you have the kavanah shaloi l'shma, it's ma'akiv and it invalidates the carbon completely? Alam Rav Safra, so therefore Rav Safra says, v'zavachta pesach. So this pasuk we just brought, v'zavachta pesach, is the Kedar Rav Nachman, as we just dashed on the according to Rav Nachman, that the pesach, the leftover pesach, is for a shlomim. Now going back, Shomer is chodesh ha'aviv. That pasuk, the extra pasuk that says Shomer is chodesh ha'aviv and v'asisa pesach. What is that coming to say? The mitzvah. That's coming to say that l'chatchila, the right mitzvah is to have the right kavanah for what? B'shinu kodesh, regarding not having a kavanah for a different carbon. Then when it says the pasuk v'amartem zevach pesach, so over here this is extra, when it says zevach and pesach, b'shini bailim l'mitzvah hu, b'shini bailim l'mitzvah. So this is talking about shini bailim, as we said before, Me'ena Inyan, so it's saying that if you had in mind a different owner, l'chatchila, it will not work for the chiyuv of the person. But now, from where do I know, additionally, that this is a must, that it's ma'akiv, that it will invalidate the entire carbon? The answer is hu. There's a word after that in the pasuk, in that pasuk where it says v'amartem zevach pesach. So the pasuk says zevach pesach hu. So it's the zevach pesach that shows that you can't have a kavanah of shili bailim when you shech the carbon. That's the zevach. But then there's hu. Who is another word? It. La'akev bein hacha v'hacha. Comes to be ma'akev to say for both, for shini bailim and shini kodesh, that it's a must. And if you have this kavanah shaloi l'shma, either one of them, it's going to invalidate the whole carbon. That's the extra pasuk, the second time the Torah says it to show that it's totally possible. But the Gemara now says, but we're still missing, we don't have a full source for this. Why? Because va'ashkechan zviche, the source in the pasuk that we brought for shini bailim in this pasuk of v'amartem zevach pesach. What's the source in the pasuk? It specifically says zevach. Zevach is only the shchita of it. Shar Avedis Minalon, but how do I know that this will apply to the other Avedis of the carbon as well, regarding the Shini Bailim? That says the Gemara, Hoyel v'goli goli. Once the Torah revealed this point regarding Shini Kodesh, because by Shini Kodesh, you have the other pasuk, and there what did it say? V'asisa Pesach. Shomres Chodesh Aviv v'asisa Pesach. V'asisa means not only the Shechita, V'asisa means all of the actions, all of the avodas, that they have to be done lishma, and it's a must. So that reveals also that similar regarding Shini Bailim, even though the lashon of the pasuk is only Zevach, but I apply that it means also regarding all the different avodas as well. Rav Ashi Omar, however, Rav Ashi argues and says, Hoyel v'gali gali loy amrina. He doesn't agree to this svara that we learn out from the Shini Kodesh, where the Torah reveals that it refers to all the avodas, that we should apply the same for the Shini Bailim. We don't say that. So Ella Avedis Minala, and all the other Avedis that would be completely possible by the carbon Pesach, not only the Shechita, from where do I know this? So he says as follows, because really you have to start from a different place. This is a pasuk the Gemara brought also earlier in the Masechta. The pasuk says, the pasuk goes on to say that all the other karbanos mention the Chattas, Asham, Lilum, Zevach Hashlamim, and it's from this pasuk that the Gemara learned that earlier that we compare all the karbanos to each other. But the thing is, in this pasuk, it does not mention Pesach though. But then there's a brayse. V'tanya, the brayse says, "Biyoim tzavaysais b'nei Yisrael lahakriv karbanei," and the next pasuk where it says that Hashem commands Yidden to bring their carbon. What is that? Their carbon referring to? After already mentioned most of the karbanos in the previous pasuk, Ze b'choyer u'maiser Pesach. It's adding here also the b'choyer and the maiser and Pesach. Therefore, I see already from here regarding the fact that lechatchila you should not have a kavanah shalei lishma. That I learn out right over here. Hikisha akasav l'shlamim. We compare the Pesach to the carbon shlamim, ma shlamim, just like by the shlamim we already learned that earlier in the Masechta. Bein shini kodesh, bein shini bailim. Whether he's having the wrong kavanah in the name of the carbon or for the wrong owner, be'inon, it must be so lemitzvah l'chatchila. It has to be. So I've called bein shini kodesh, bein shini bailim lemitzvah. So this applies also by all other karbanos mentioned in this pasuk, including also the carbon Pesach, which the Braisa says is hinted here as well. So the fact that l'chatchila it all has to be done l'shma for both of these, Shini Kodesh and Shini Bailim, that's learned out already from here. And now I go on further and say ukishlamim, and I continue comparing to shlamim in another point as well. Ma shlamim, just like regarding the shlamim, I say and I see the halacha there is bein zviche bein shar avedis. This halacha, as we learned it out earlier in the Masechta, that applies both to the shchit of the carbon and the other avedis as well. There's no difference. L'mitzvah that l'chatchila it must be shechted l'shma. So avodos la'akiv. So the same thing over here as well. Sorry, I missed the line. Af Pesach. So too when it comes to the carbon Pesach, loitach boy ben zviche l'shar avodos. We're not going to make any distinction between the shechting and the other avodos. And this is not only for Shini Kodesh, but for Shini Bailim as well, and la'akiv. But over here, it's going to be ma'akiv. It's not just for a mitzvah. And that's because we also have the additional pasuk that we brought before. So we have a second pasuk that it has to be liikuve. Therefore, we know that this applies by all the avedis. So the Gemara says, so Ella, according to this pshat that the Gemara is saying now, of Ashi's pshat, so hu lamali, that extra word hu that the Gemara mentioned before, that I think it was Rav Safra that said before, that extra word hu that we said, what do we learn out from that word? Rav Ashi doesn't use it. So the Gemara says the hu that it says by the carbon Pesach, and again, the lashon of the pasuk is va'amartem zevach Pesach hu. What is that doing there? Kedetanya, it's coming to teach a point that it says in the Braisa. Nama bePesach hu. By the carbon Pesach it says hu, indicating that it must be lishma, but that's b'shchita. It's saying it by the shchita la'akiv, to say that here it's a must. It's going to pass the carbon otherwise, completely. Aval asham le'namba by hu. By the asham it also says hu. It would seem that there it should also be ma'akiv completely. But where though does it say the hu? It only says the hu later on, after it speaks about burning the pieces on the Mizbeach. Now, if so, I see the difference in the location, where it says the hu by the Pesach and where it says the hu by the Asham. That indicates that the hu by the Asham is not here to tell me that Shalei Lishma passes completely. Because v'hu atzma Shalei hukteru emurav, because the imurim, b'chlal, even if you don't bring these sacrificial parts in the Mizbeach, kosher, the whole carbon is kosher. So basically what the Gemara is saying is that the who is used for this point, to see the difference in where the who is written in the Torah. If you would only have one who by Asham, even though it's written after where the Emurim are brought, I would think that that who is teaching me that it has to be Lishma and it's Ma'akiv, which is actually the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. It's in the first Mishnah here, in the Pedic. So therefore, the Torah writes also who by Pesach, and then I compare the two and I see who by Pesach is written by the Shechita. That has to be Lishma. Who that's written by the Asham, which is after the burning of the parts of the Mizbeach, that's not over there, that's not an Inyan of Lishma, because that's something that's not even necessary to do to be Ma'akta for the whole carbon. That's why the Torah wrote this extra who here.